Hey folks, welcome back. Part 3 in my compression masterclass. Let's get straight in. Okay, so quick recap on the things that we've gone through so far. If you haven't checked out part 1 and 2, make sure that you go and do that. We have explored, let me pull up a compressor. We have explored so far the threshold, the ratio, makeup gain, knee, and attack. So we've looked at those 5 main controls on a compressor. So far we've been using the auto release function. Today we're going to talk about the release control a little bit more. We're going to talk about a technique called parallel compression as well. And then we're going to talk about getting some distortion, some saturation out of our compressor plugins and processes. So quick reminder of what we started with. We started out in this situation here. We've compressed all 4 of these tracks in different ways. So we've got all 4 of these compressors working in slightly different ways. And at the moment, all of those compressors are using the auto release function. Now, auto release is a really great thing because it's basically listening to and responding to the information that is coming through the compressor and exceeding the threshold. So it's kind of doing more work than you can really do as a human. So it's nice in that sense, but if you are feeling that you want to be in complete control and you want to set that yourself, let's talk about it. So as we mentioned last time, attack is the length of time that it takes for a compressor to kick in once the threshold has been exceeded. The release is the reverse of that. It's the length of time it takes for the compression to return to 0 once the level has come back below the threshold. So once our signal has come back down below the threshold, how long is it going to take that needle to come back to 0? Now, a nice way to think about how to express release is to talk about it as the compression breathing. So often you'll talk about making that release breathe in time with the music. Let's look at that in a couple of different contexts. So on the drums here, let's take off the auto release. I'm going to solo out the drums and let's watch the needle, first of all, from a really fast release, 5 milliseconds, and then going all the way to a super slow release, so 5,000 milliseconds, that's 5 seconds, that's really long. Okay, really fast. Now we go to a slow release. So the difference is plain to see and plain to hear as well, I hope. With the release being really fast, there's plenty of opportunity for that compressor to turn completely off once the signal has come back down below the threshold. With the release really slow, the compressor never turns off. It's always working because once that signal goes above the threshold, the release is so slow that it never has enough time to come off. So you're always compressing. Now, in the context of trying to apply a natural release, talking about it in terms of making the music breathing is quite a nice thing. So with drums, for example, I might say, okay, I want to feel that the compressor is turning completely off by the time the snare strikes again. So for all of the backbeats. So I'm going to start with this control really fast and I'm going to back it off and off and off until the compressor is just returning to being off by the time the next snare strikes. So around about there, I'm at 160 milliseconds. So you see how this needle is just returning to 0 by the time the next snare strikes. Now, out of curiosity, let's compare that to the auto release. Now, the auto release is a little bit faster, actually. Let's see our personal release. And the effect that that's having is that with the release a little bit slower, it's maintaining the decay of that snare drum a bit more. It's making the snare drum a little bit longer still. So listen to my release. And the auto release. The release on the snare drum there is a little bit faster, so it's not quite as long on the tail. Now, neither is right or wrong. It's always, with these things, a case of circumstance and personal preference. So you might say, actually, I think the release when I've got auto release sounds great, sounds fine. You might say, I prefer the tail a little bit longer. That's totally up to you, okay? Let's leave it on the auto release for the sake of simplicity. Let's go over to the Pro C2 just to see an example here. Let's solo this guitar. Now, at the moment, our auto release is here. Let's turn that, or let's listen to it. Okay, so it's fast at the moment. Let's take that off and let's dial this back. So you see now here on the graph how the slope, that release, that decay time has got much longer. So it's a gentler release, meaning that the signal is being sustained a little bit more in between each of those notes. Compared to the auto. It's more spiky on these parts. Let's really exaggerate. Okay, so again, neither is right nor wrong. It's just a case of, do you want to use, in this case, the auto release is making it kind of quite spiky and the release is quite fast. Or do you want your own release and do you want to make it a little bit more to your taste? Again, totally a case of personal preference. It's neither here nor there. So let's leave that one on our own release setting. Why not? We'll leave the other two on the auto release. That's absolutely fine. So that's the release control. To reiterate one more time, it's the length of time it takes for the compressor to return to being off once the signal has come back down below the threshold. Okay, now I promised in the last session that we would talk about parallel compression in this session as well. Now, there are two types of compression. The first type of compression is what's called serial compression. That is, if you think about a TV series where you have one episode followed by another, followed by another. So things follow in series. So if I were to, let's say, want two compressors on this drum track for whatever reason, having one compressor followed by another compressor would be what's called serial compression, where you do one lot of compression and then you do a second lot. One after the other is serial because they're in series. Conversely, parallel compression is where you do things simultaneously at the same time. So what we want is to basically mix two different signals together. We want to mix a dry signal with a wet signal. We want to mix an uncompressed signal with a compressed signal and do those and hear those two things together in parallel. Now, within your compressors, generally, there will be a mix control. So you've got a dry-wet blend here where you can mix the 100% compressed signal with the 0% compressed signal. So you have a dry-wet blend, and whatever compressor you're in probably will have that control. So if I look in the C2 here I've got my dry-wet control, so I can blend in the dry gain, I can blend out the wet gain just like that. So not quite as simple in the Pro C2 because you're boosting one and taking out the other, but even so, it's there, right? And as I say, whatever compressor you're using and whatever DAW, it'll probably have a dry-wet control. Now, why might you want to do parallel compression rather than serial compression? Well, the answer might be that you might want to compress something more aggressively, you might want to squash it even further, but you still want to hear some of the original dynamics, some of the natural sound of the initial performance, but you want a more heavily compressed signal underneath it. So let's take these drums as an example. Now, I'm going to leave my initial compressor there. I'm going to make a new instance of a compressor. And on this second instance, I'm going to compress really, really aggressively. I'm going to really smash it hard, okay? So I'm going to put my ratio up pretty high at 10:1. Let's reset my makeup gain for now. Okay, so really aggressive compression. Now, probably we're not ever going to want to use that compression as is in the mix. Let's just level match this a little bit. But what I might want to do is blend some of that heavily compressed signal underneath my original signal. So now I'm down at sort of 40% blend. So I've got 40% of the compressed signal and 60% of the dry. Let's A/B this first off. So with that extra kind of really compressed signal underneath, it's giving a little bit more smack, a little bit more sustain. It's maybe a little bit too much still. So we're able to get some additional kind of thickness from the sound without just having to have that really smashed signal, which is a cool thing. Another time where it's used a lot is on groups, is on buses. So let's bus all of these things together so they're all coming into this summing stack here, and let's compress all of these things together, and then we're going to blend it back with our blend control here. Let's have a look at that. So there, I've really kind of squashed everything together. I've really compressed those things together aggressively, but then I've moved the blend down to 30%. And maybe that's still a little bit prominent, but I'm trying to make sure that you can hear the effect there. Listen to it once more, in and then out. So you hear how it's kind of really pulling those things together quite a lot more. Now, yes, it's a bit over the top, but that's to make sure that you can hear what's going on. But parallel compression can be a great way of getting a bit more sustain, a bit more volume out of things without changing the overall sonic characteristic of something, without making it feel totally different. Now, another way that you can do this, rather than setting it up on, say, a track stack here, is we could make a bus. So let's bus all of these things over to this bus here. Let's set the output of the bus to my track stack here to sum 1. I'm going to move that compressor over here, set it to 100% wet. So what I've done there is to send all of those tracks post fader, so at the level that they're coming out of the tracks, into this new bus. I've moved the compressor over here. It's set exactly as it was before. So it's going to be coming in exactly the same as it was onto this summing stack. I've changed the dry wet, so it's 100%. And then that is being sent to this sum. So this here is our parallel compression, because I can then blend that in with our dry signal here. And you hear how, as I blend that in, it's giving much more kind of thickness. It's definitely getting louder, but it's that thickness that we get from parallel compression, because we're able to put in that really squashed signal and then boost it in underneath the unsquashed signal. So we retain the dynamics and the attack and the punch from the uncompressed signal, but we blend in that really squashed signal underneath, which is a really great tool to have in your toolbox. Now, the other thing that I promised that I would talk to you about today is getting some saturation or distortion out of a compression plugin. Now, normally when people hear the term distortion, they go, oh, electric guitars, distorted, that's not what I want. Distortion is just another word for saturation. Overdrive, saturation, distortion, they're all different levels of the same thing, which basically just means to add additional harmonic content to something to make it sound fuller. The more you distort something or saturate something, the more harmonic content you're adding, the more chaotic the sound gets. That's why when you get really heavily distorted electric guitars in rock or metal, for example, they sound really, really messy and heavy because there's so much additional harmonic content that's been thrown into it that they get that kind of sound. But when we do that more tastefully and much more subtly, we get the thickening effect of thickening a sound, but we don't have that kind of traditionally distorted sound that you think of when you hear of the term distortion. Now, in the stock plugin here for Logic, we've got distortion control and 3 different modes of distortion. So a soft distortion, a hard distortion, and a clipping distortion. So let's just solo our drums here. Let's pull up our first drum compressor and let's hear these different modes. Now, we're not given much information as to what they're doing, so we just have to listen and use our ears. Now, before we listen, I'm just going to throw a limiter onto our mix bus here, just to make sure that I'm not gonna clip anything for you guys. So 3 different flavors of distortion, if you like. Now, I don't know what these are exactly doing under the hood, but for me, the soft distortion, for whatever reason, always sounds the most aggressive. I don't know why, maybe that's just my ears. But, so if that's what I'm looking for, an aggressive kind of distortion, I'd go there. Hard and clip have their own individual flavors as well. But, to me, you just need to listen and choose which one you like the sound of, or none of them if you don't want any distortion. But what it's doing, I think you'll agree, in all 3 modes, is to thicken that sound, is to make it a bit fuller. And generally speaking, fuller is a good thing. Again, if we go back to the principle of why we compress in the first place, it's to give us a more controlled signal, a less dynamic signal, so that we can mix things more easily. We can balance things more easily in our mix. So if we've got a fuller, more controlled signal, that's going to make it easier to balance in a mix. So I'm going to leave that on the soft mode here. I think that sounds great. I'm going to go to my bass and have a listen as well. Now the transient got a little bit aggressive on the soft mode, so I'm going to use the hard here, and then I'll see if I need to rebalance these things at all as a result. Balance sounds good. Now on the Pro C2, for example, it's not quite as simple. You have these styles in here, and each of these styles will impart a different kind of flavor or a different sort of saturation. So we've got a classic compression, opto, something specifically for vocal, mastering, bus, punch, and pumping. So on this electric guitar, for example, if we listen to, let's go to the pumping setting. Very, very different to the clean setting. Let's try, let's look at the opto. That sounds great to me. Cool, like that. And let's listen to the vocal. And in the C2, as you saw just there, there is a vocal setting, whatever that means. You see how actually when I change that algorithm, it's doing some of its own things. So the vocal setting here turned off the ratio, turned off the knee control. It said, for a vocal, this is what we think you should be doing.
Go, go, go on now. Go, go, go on now. Go, go, go on now.
So let's go with what it suggests. Let's check our blend.
Go, go, go on now. Go, go, go on now.
Okay, so let's A-B before, turn off the buses as well.
Go, go, go on now.
With after.
Go, go on now.
Now, of course, there's a big volume differential there. It's much louder now that it's compressed. But even if we put that aside, the actual balance and how full things feel and how much more easily they blend with each other because the dynamic range isn't so significant is plain to see. Now, what are these different distortion controls doing in these compressors? What they're basically trying to do in a less complicated way is allow you to access some of the traditional architectures of hardware compressors. Now, hardware compressors are built in different ways. There are different sorts of circuitries that can be built into a compressor, and the different circuits will compress in different ways. Now, in the Logic Pro stock compressor, it's actually got some of those options built into it for you. So you'll see here we've got VCA compression, in 1, 2, 3 different guises. We've got FET compression in 1, 2 different guises. And we've got opto compression in 1 guise. And as we choose those different options, here you'll see that the skin of the plugin changes, and in fact even some of the controls that are available change according to what different architecture we have selected. So in the next session, now that we understand what a compressor does, how to make it sound great, we're going to get a little bit deeper and start to understand what the main types of compression are, their different characteristics and what they do. So we're going to look at VCA compression, we're going to look at FET compression, we're going to look at opto compression, and we're going to look at vari-mu compression, which is not listed here. They're the kind of main types of compression that you'll come across a lot, and you'll start to understand their different characteristics and why you might select a certain type of compressor for a certain purpose. I'll see you in the next one.